I am Kari Arfstrom. I'm the Executive Director of the Flipped Learning Network. I'll talk a little bit more about this towards the end of the presentation, but we are the nonprofit organization for educators who are or who wish to be a flipped educator. And as we go through this session today, we'll do some definitions of what that means, who it is, and who may be doing it and who wants to do it. As an English teacher, you always have to, what did you learn from your speech teacher when you were in 9th grade? You always tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you've told them. So I'm a firm believer in outlines, and so today we'll talk a little bit about the definition of flipped classroom and flipped learning. They are not synonymous. Review the 4 pillars of flipped learning. Combat some of those myths and misconceptions that you all might have or you might have read about when it comes to flipped learning. Of course, since we're here at a user conference, I want to talk a little bit about the tools in the of the trade and what is needed in a flipped classroom. I know some of you are probably researchers in your own right and are looking for the data out there, so I'll share some of that with you. And I do want to leave time for question and answer. I'm a storyteller, and so I go around and I collect stories and then regurgitate them at the appropriate time in the appropriate audience. So it's very important for me to hear your stories as well. And so I'll stop at the appropriate times, ask you to share, and I, of course, will tell a few stories along the way. In particular with flipped learning, it is all about the story sharing. You do it that way? Well, I do it this way. Could we do it that way? Exactly what Josh was just talking about this morning. Before I start that, though, I'd like to have an idea of who is in the room with me today, just so I can personalize my remarks to make sure that they are what you all need today. So when we were in the keynote session earlier today, I saw a bunch of hands go up, and some people identified themselves as K-12 or higher education. So do we have, who are the higher ed folks in the room? A few of you, are you professors, curriculum designers, students? Professor? Administrator? Curriculum designer? Designer? Great. Okay, so we've got our higher ed folks in the room. K-12. Teacher? Great. Curriculum designer? Instructional technology? So who are the rest of you? I know who Kate is. She's with TechSmith. We're my Adobe people in the room. Okay, 4 Adobe people.
I work for Quest Diagnostics. I'm their Director of Education.
Great. Nice to know you.
Corporate education.
Great. Oh, I've gotten a few calls. So who else did I miss?
Corporate. I work at a gaming manufacturer here in town.
Big in this area right now. Thanks for being here. Did I get you? Great. Higher ed, K-12, corporate? Great. Did I get you?
Me? No. I'm an instructional designer for a company that does hotel revenue management. Yeah.
Interesting. Think about that one. Good. Did I?
Corporate and consumer trade.
Okay. Well, great. We really have a wide breadth of audience, and so I'll try to dig up some stories in your areas. I will admit I'm used to talking to either K-12 or higher ed, but I'm percolating on ideas. So like I said, I'm a storyteller. Okay, so the first question is to flip or not to flip, and I know that's a very flippant answer, but it is the question that you as educators, and if you need, when I use the word educator, feel free to use the word trainer, what word you use in your vernacular. I don't mean to leave anyone out with the words that I am using. So if it's easier for you to think of trainer instead of educator, feel free. But there must be a better way for when we are doing our trainings, if it's at a traditional school, if it's in a corporate setting, if it's in a hotel ballroom, this is hotel session room. This is what it traditionally has looked like and still sometimes continues to look like. You have the person with the information standing at the front of the room, being very professorial, lecturing to the students who are so neatly sitting in desks facing forward. I know you can really tell this is us, right? But this is really what it is changing quickly too. You've got students out in the field, literally getting their hands dirty. You've got, students working together in that collaborative group that Josh was just talking about. Small group interaction, and literally the teacher, sitting on the floor with her students, digging into maybe this is that problem-based experiment that Josh was just talking about. So this is really what we're working towards in sharing our information. So let's just shore up a couple of the definitions right away. In particular, the media tends to make these two words synonymous with each other because one is very easy to define and the other one is a little harder to define. And so I just want to take a moment to make sure that we're using the same words when describing the same process. And again, you don't need to take notes on this, it's all online. So with a flipped classroom, and that's the basic term that you probably see used most in the media. And it's usually, the nut in the first paragraph of any story is about how the teacher records her lecture, puts it online, that becomes the homework for the students, and then the kids come to class the next day. Then what? They're missing a whole segment of this. So we've even gone further to demystify some of those myths right now. We could call it the lecture. We prefer to call it the direct instruction. And it moves from outside the group learning environment, where we are sitting right now, i.e. the classroom, to an individual learning space. That individual learning space might be the house. And a lot of times that's how it's most easily defined. It can be the library, it could be the bus, it could be in the back seat of the minivan on their mom's smartphone. It could be the community center. I just want us to get beyond that simple definition of what a flipped classroom is. It could be a flipped corporate training event. It could be a flipped professional education for your instructors. So put this into your own context. But no, it's broader than just that simple definition that we're getting in the media. Now let's take it to what is flipped learning. Flipped learning is what occurs after the flipped classroom has happened. This is where you move from that teacher-centered classroom into the student learning environment. And I'll give you multiple examples of this as we get deeper into this presentation. But just know this becomes where I am lecturing at you, if it's face-to-face or if it's on a video, or are we now moving into where we are sharing our collaboration and sharing our work and we're learning from each other. And this is the magic that happens in the classroom, and this is really what makes us different from MOOCs and from blended learning, because this is all about personalization. This is the magic that happens in the classroom, and we'll get into that deeper. Keep in mind, as you are doing this, it's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to even happen within a month. John Bergman and Aaron Sams, who are the pioneers of flipped learning, it took them years, and they're still perfecting it. So, don't think that this is something where you just read the manual and it occurs. Give yourself time, find a partner, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But it does take time, but there are natural steps that you take to get to that to the flip mastery. So John and Aaron, who I mentioned earlier, who are the founding board members of the Flip Learning Network, this is the one question that they repeat over and over again. And that's just, what is the best use of my face-to-face class time? What is the best use of my face-to-face training time? What is the best use of my professional development? So what is it that you can use when you do have the chance to get everyone in the room? Why can't they have already heard the direct instruction ahead of time? And then they can jump into whatever it is when they are together. Is it the most valuable use of face-to-face time? Is it to practice, discuss, assess, instruct, apply, or is it even a remediation? And these are just some of the things to think about. Now, for those of us who went to teacher school, you will remember Bloom's taxonomy. So the triangle, it's just the opposite of this, and down at the bottom is where the remembering and the understanding. And this is where right now most schools are at. They are teaching so that students remember and students understand. So what year was the War of 1812? That's remembering. Okay, we've been there, we've done that. Is that what we needed, for our students to remember? With using Bloom's taxonomy, if we flip it, which was done by one of his students, we get much higher into Bloom's taxonomy because we're offloading remembering and understanding into that environment where we don't need to be there when we lecture at our students. That can be delivered over a 7-minute video. The lecture might take 20 minutes in my classroom because you've got bell schedules and you've got your 2 kids in the back row who need to be separated. You know who I'm talking about. And so if you offload this, time shift this, all of this can then be done in the classroom, and that's what you want to get to. A lot of you have probably heard about the Common Core state standards. We won't talk about it here, but if you need to talk about it or need to know more, I can do that offline. But this is the new national standards that many states have adopted. This one actually, this depth of knowledge, which is similar to Bloom's taxonomy, but this one actually fits better into the Common Core state standards. But again, it gets into what those verbs are, what we are teaching at the various level, getting into that depth of knowledge. And so again, this is where we want to be with our students, not lecturing at them, but doing all of the fun stuff. As I mentioned, John and Aaron, who I'll probably mention a few more times, and Kate knows them as well, we got together about 12 experienced flipped educators. Now keep in mind, flipped education itself has probably only been named for the last 7 years. One could argue that Socrates invented it when he held his Socratic lectures so long ago. But John and Aaron literally wrote the book about it, so they're the ones who, it's their moniker that is attached to this. So I brought John and Aaron and about 10 other experienced educators to town, oh goodness, only a year ago. And even then, they hesitated to put too much of a definition around what is flipped learning, because it is so personal to each person on how you do it in your company compared to how Adobe does it, compared to how you work when your teachers at TechSmith do it, compared to your schools. So what they did instead was to say, okay, we will have 4 pillars that the teacher, the department, the administrators need to reflect about and change those practices in order to be a flipped learning classroom. So, and of course, we wrote this in Washington, D.C., and you always have to have clever acronyms in Washington, D.C. And you don't need to take notes on this because it's all online. But we have the flip. F is flexible environments. L is the learning culture. Again, you'll see a lot of these overlap from what Josh was talking about this morning. Intentional content and professional educators. Those are the 4 guiding principles that we acknowledge that must be changed in some fashion to have a flipped classroom. Again, I'm not going to read these to you. We're all adults. I have some handouts up here. It's also all online if you are so interested. And this does come from a blended course that the FLN and Pearson offers together. And it's about a 20-hour blended course. And this is what we do for our training, is that they have to watch the videos and reflect and do group work ahead of time. Then we come together for 1 day of face-to-face, and then we do 2 follow-on online coaching sessions, which we know research says is really key. So we've taken all the great elements and put them together in one 20-seat course. So flexible environments, we need to know that you physically have to move something in your room. If I wasn't on camera right now, I'd be wandering over there, I'd be wandering to the back of the room. But physically just change something about your training room. I mean, I would love to have gotten in here and put everything into a square, or just move the tables out of a way and put us in a circle. But just change something up in your classroom, in your corporate space. Just even putting these tables together so that this group can sit facing each other to do small group, activities. It's just physically allowing for something to change, so when the folks come in the room, they're like, this isn't that traditional classroom that I was thinking about. Maybe we're going to do something a little different today. It also means that teachers need to be flexible with what is happening and trainers and what is happening in that space. There's going to be an amount of chaos that you need to put up with. So there's flexibility in other ways besides just the physical arrangement. So, but again, all online. So it's the first F of flip. Learning culture is obviously the hardest one. How do you go in and change something, that was built around, the agronomist calendar 200 years ago? But looking at that culture, how do you determine what to deliver and how to deliver it? What is age appropriate? Obviously keeping your parents and your community informed of what's happening. One of the biggest things that we hear is that the students will come home from school and of course the parents will say, "What'd you learn in class today, honey?" Right? And the kid will say, "Nothing, Mrs. Brown doesn't lecture anymore." Well, to a parent, I would be concerned if Mrs. Brown didn't lecture anymore. But Mrs. Brown is still lecturing, it's just delivered in a different format so that when the kids come to school the next day, they have all these activities. And we especially find it for those kids who have learned how to play school. And I admit I was one of those. I figured out what it took to get the A and I gave that amount. And no one challenged me. We never, did Socratic or pure learning in classrooms in the 80s. But this would have been a huge challenge, and so students are learning in a different way. But we know they're online, learning about their passion anyway on YouTube or what have you, working in a collaborative fashion on the gaming sites they go to. So the students are going to change in their learning culture much faster than the adults will. Next is intentional content. You really need to think about, you can't just take the standards that you've had for the past 12 years. Having flipped learning come right along with the Common Core state standards is really a nice time to really think about what is this content. The standard Common Core state standards go much deeper. They're not as broad, but much deeper. And teaching in a flipped classroom gives you that time to go much deeper into your curriculum, so it's really a nice matchup of what's happening right now. And of course, you really need to be a professional educator to be aware of, change your practice. I often tell the story of my mom taught for 35 years. She was a master of her content. She was a science teacher. And she was a master of class discipline. You don't want to take her off. So she would have been the perfect teacher, and another slide down the way will prove this. She would have been the best one to teach in a flipped classroom environment. She was rock solid on her content. She was rock solid on classroom management. Where me, in my first year of teaching, I could barely keep, Shakespeare's plays, separate in my mind, more or less, teach, what really happened in Hamlet. And I absolutely had no classroom control. So I would not have made a good classroom teacher until I mastered those things. I needed to have that lecture to have that, 15 minutes of control in my classroom before I attempted to have discussions. And so it all, having that professional educator, one who has been in the business, one who is ready for some change, is who most teachers are.
I'm just curious of the role of a facilitator as opposed to an educator. So I'm not the expert in most of the subjects, but I might be helping a subject matter expert facilitate a session. Can you, it seems like you can still.
Absolutely.
It's a different role, but.
You would just have to train for it differently. I'm going in, a friend of mine has to be gone for a week for various reasons, and so I'm taking over her classes at a local university. I'm just walking in, I don't know the subject matter expert, but I know which videos I'm going to pre-assign to the students, and I know which cues I'm going to ask them to have them peer instruction within the class. So I think the older that the students are, the less that you must know, especially if you're working with adult trainers. But if you're in a 9th grade science classroom, you kind of got to know your subject. Any other questions before I move on? Again, all online. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly go through some myths and misconceptions because I really want to get to some Q&A. These are all things that you've probably read about in the media as well. A lot of times, actually there was just this huge rant. Did you see Elliot Solomon's rant this week in THE Journal. Oh, it was a good one. So it's not all about the videos. And this is one of the first questions I get asked. What do you do for students who don't have access at home? And that's one of the reasons why we say direct instruction, and we try not to use the term video. These are learning assets. The learning asset might be a video. It could be a book, you know those old-fashioned things that we used to read when we were in high school? It could be a text. It could be a game. It could be worksheets. It could be doing a project-based learning. I mean, it's the learning asset. It's not always the video. Again, this is something that the media has too quickly given this a definition without expanding it for what it means. A lot of time, though, it is the video. If that is what the intentional content is of the teacher, then that is what the student will be watching. Again, the videos are not the same length. You know, think about when you're in college, the lecture would be 45 minutes long. You'd barely have time to ask one question. We're not talking 45-minute videos here. The rule of thumb that John and Aaron use is 1 minute per grade. So if you're in 9th grade, approximately a 9-minute video. If you're in 3rd grade, approximately, you can do the math, I don't need to do it for you. I do hear from my AP teachers that their videos tend to be longer, but what they try to do is chunk it up. So maybe overall they have 40 minutes of video for homework that night, but maybe they'll do a 20-minute chunk, a 20-minute chunk, and a 20-minute chunk. But most of the times teachers are saying that they can get by with a much shorter video because, as I mentioned, they don't have the bells to contend with, they don't have classroom management skills to contend with, and you still want to leave something for the class the next day. The other thing that I've heard from teachers a lot of times, we'll get the questions, well, what do you do for students who didn't watch the video? Well, that's a homework issue, and that's a school issue. But one of the best pieces of advice I heard from a teacher is they always put one mistake in every video. And for entrance into the room that day, the student has to tell the teacher what the mistake is on the way into the classroom. So I've heard that work really well. The other is they just take notes. My superstar AP, Stacy Rochon, she sends home the outline. She's not there to trick the kids. She's there to help them get through AP Calc. And so she sends her notes home, on an iPad, not on paper, and then they have to take notes as they follow her lecture. I've heard, pop-up quizzes, and Adobe products offer that, where embedded right in your lecture, you can put in a 3-point quiz, and then you get a quick dashboard back to see, okay, if every student got question number 1 right, you don't need to reteach it. If half of your students got number 2 wrong, okay, you divide your class in 2. Those who got it wrong, you do some small group instruction right then and there. The other kids who got it right can go on and start working on their worksheets, in small groups together. But if everyone got question number 3 wrong, that teacher better start right there in the classroom with a full group lecture and reteach what didn't get taught in the lecture, because obviously something didn't translate right. And so it's not always about the video, but it's often portrayed as the only definition of flipped learning. Another thing is creates the digital divide. If you're assigning this for your K-12 students, and higher ed and professionally, I think it's understood that everyone has access to the internet. But it is still a concern in K-12 schools. I have another teacher who at the beginning of the school year asks his kids, so who's on Facebook? Of course, every kid raises his hand that they're on Facebook. Well, if he would have asked, who here is internet at home? The kids would have said, oh, internet at home means homework? No, I don't want to say that. But no, if they have access to Facebook, they have internet to the internet. On occasion, you definitely will find families who do not have internet at home. That's when you send home a DVD, that's when you send home a flash drive, that's when you send home, in some instances, Aaron would ask anytime that a teacher or someone in the community got a new computer to donate the old computer. He fixed it up and sent it home with the kid. You open up the libraries ahead of time if you're lucky enough to have school buses with Wi-Fi. There is a high school in north of Detroit. It's a very low socioeconomic status high school. It is the first high school in the nation to flip in entirety, and they have a no homework policy. Flat out no homework in their high school. The majority of students either have to go straight to work or go home and babysit other siblings because the parent has to go to work. So and even though they're completely a flipped school, they have time within the school hour built in specifically for students to go and use a computer in the library, in the student lounge. You connect to their Wi-Fi system in the building if they happen to have a wireless device, but that's where their students watch their videos. If you are big into research and data, you will want to read their case study or one of our other pieces, but it's Clinton Dale High School, and Greg Green, the principal, rocks, totally rocks. Relies on homework. We've talked a little bit about this. More and more schools are, there's a backlash against homework. But again, not every teacher, and again, this is from a K-12 perspective, a little different when you're higher ed or training, because that is your job to do that. But in K-12, don't think that all 6 of your kids' teachers are going to have this every night. So it's not like they're going to be coming home and having 6 hours of videos to watch. If I were a math teacher, I would flip every day. If I were a science teacher, I would flip every day. As an English teacher, I would flip units, but I would not flip every day. I would use flip learning more for writers' workshops, and I'll talk about that in a moment. If I were a social studies teacher, I would use it in a different way. PE teachers, we have an awesome PE teacher outside of Chicago, and he only changes his activity every 2 weeks. So he has a different video that students have to watch prior to coming into the change of that activity. His videos tend to be a little bit longer. They're about 12 minutes long, but students only need to watch it every other week. But Google his pickleball video, it's viral. So no, it's not. And a lot of times then, if they watch the video at home, they still might have some other homework to accompany that. But most of the time, think about in math, that was the worst for me, because I got it when I heard the teacher lecture in the class. But then when I went home and tried to do the problems on my own, I just didn't get it. But if I could have watched it at home, come back, worked with the teacher, worked with my peers, if I could have sat next to Danny Thompson, I would have so gotten an A in math class. It's just you could ask questions, and you weren't sitting there at your dining room table crying because you didn't have anyone to ask. Where if it would have just been the opposite and could do it there, I would have gotten a PhD. Oh, wait, I did. Flip learning does not propagate bad teaching. A bad teacher is a bad teacher is a bad teacher. A bad trainer is a bad trainer is a bad trainer. But flip learning really allows good teachers to be even better. And so you'll start collecting your own stories as you're out working with people as well. Go ahead.
It's the same as blended learning.
A lot of times people think the two are synonymous, but blended learning doesn't have this interaction. If I was in a blended class, the students would watch the video, either in class or at home, do the homework associated with, and then just go watch the next video. It's just sequential. Chapter 1, Chapter 2, Chapter 3. Flip learning is all about that one-to-one interaction between the teacher and the student. And so we think that flip learning is a subset of blended learning.
But both entails face-to-face component still. That's what you're saying? Because I always got the impression blended
Right.
learning is that you have face-to-face, but you also have a mode of delivery that is outside of face-to-face.
Right.
Just like what you're doing here.
But if you look at the true definitions of what they're studying in blended learning, there's not that face-to-face interactive component, and that's what flip learning is. It's that changing from a teacher-centered classroom to a student-centered classroom. And I'll give you some more examples. Okay, since we're at a tech conference, we just have to talk a little bit about some of the tools of the trade, and we still have 25 minutes, that's fine. I'm not a techie person, so if anyone wants to correct me at any time, you may, and if we want to add to this or if we forgot something, I'll apologize right now. This is what I am hearing from teachers that I've worked with around the world in various types of schools and so forth, of what they need. And again, most schools have this equipment, but it's one of these things where the school district bought the equipment, but then they really never taught their students how to use it. We've all heard those stories. I'm sure that never happens in corporate America at all. So, a lot of these things teachers already have with flipped learning, with blended learning, with, online learning, however we want to define it as we get narrower and narrower, is some of these things already exist, but now we can pull them all together and really see how it can affect the learning of a student. So most teachers have access to a desktop, a laptop, or a mobile device. I think we can all agree on that, sometimes shared, sometimes it's personal. Most of them nowadays come with a camera. You can use the internal camera to your laptop, or you can buy an external camera. I've seen it done both ways. For your world learning teachers, I have heard that a better quality microphone is needed, especially when you're teaching, inflection and conversation and so forth. I've just heard from my foreign language teachers that a higher quality microphone is needed. But in most instances, that's the only thing that they've had to purchase. So just keep that in mind. And they've told me best buy $50, Software enterprise solutions, you do need some sort of lecture capture software. Obviously, Adobe has a product that we've worked with. TechSmith is here in the room. They have products. There are plenty of other products out there. Some are free, some are free, some you get for free and then you can upgrade. But there are really simple ones, and then there are really amazing, cool things that you can do. But at the basis of it, you do need to have some sort of lecture capture software. You need to have some sort of storage site. It could be public, such as YouTube. Some schools still block YouTube. So then you would need, a private site if your school has its own learning management system, or you work with a company that integrates into one. John and Erin actually keep their videos on both private sites and public sites. The reason they do that, their school did block YouTube, but the students not always could get onto their learning management system. So they kept the videos and then all of the instructional assets that go along with it within their LMS system, but they did put their videos on YouTube so that if the student was traveling, was at grandma's house, they could still get to them outside of the system. So I'm hearing more and more people putting it in multiple places. We talked a little bit about that learning analytics piece. Again, it can be very informal. The dashboard concept, I think, is just amazing. Where I quickly described it, if you have like a 3 or 5 point quiz, the teacher looks at that right away before the class is walking in and said, okay, they got it. Some did, some don't, they definitely didn't, and retools her entire lesson right there based on that quick dashboard. And of course, we're hearing all sorts of information right now on big data and formal assessment of information, and we're now getting that as well. So again, learning analytics at all sorts of levels. You do need some sort of method for communication between the teacher, the students, the administration, and parents. Sometimes that might come with your learning management system. A lot of people are just using Google these days for simplicity. Some schools have, they're entirely their own system, but some form of electronic communication. This is the area that is changing the quickest, and I cannot keep up with it, but it's just exploding, and I'm so excited about the content of it. What is out there right now? There's some really good stuff, and there's some really not good stuff. But there's a whole debate right now between curate and create, and I think it's going to come right down to blended. And I hesitate to use that word blended just because of what we were talking about, hybrid model. And so I'm still looking for this term of what it's going to come out to be. I just spent September at the Open University in the UK talking about open educational resources. Josh just mentioned it at the very end of his speech. But I'm really interested in to see what teachers are doing with open education access. In the curate, where teachers go out and find the information that's already been written for them, that's already been curated for them. Did I hear someone say? You need to pay attention. Is it copyrighted? So I have, my AP teacher will not put her videos on a public site just because she's teaching from a copyrighted book. So all of her videos reside on her school's LMS system. For instance, she feels very strongly about that. John and Aaron teach from a copyrighted book, but they put it out there. They haven't been sued yet, so it's all on where the comfort level is and how much effort the teacher wants to put into it, or what's working in the classroom. You know, if it's working, it's working. So you've got under curation, you've got copyright, then you have, I just blanked on CCC, Common Creative License. You've got free, and then you've got for a fee. And you know, a lot of teachers are creating all of their own stuff. Some of it are, again, putting it on public sites. Some of it are only putting it onto their own LMS. So this is really murky right now, and I'm really excited to see what will happen in this area. It's all brand new, and it's wide open right now. Assessments is huge. And I know Adobe, that's one of the features that you have on Presenter, is you can add surveys and quizzes and, you know, the formative and the summative. But I think this is really key because it's one of the questions we always get asked. Now that I'm in a flipped classroom, now that I'm teaching in a flipped learning way, what do my assessments look like? You know, and a lot of times they're not talking about the big end of the chapter test, because you still have to do that. But how do you keep track of what the students are doing? How do you do those quick touches to know that they've done the homework, that they're getting it, and that they can move on? So this, again, is an area that's wide open and a lot of people are struggling with. One of the things about flipped learning is that, think of it, it's the stepping stones or the bridge to everything else that can be done in the classroom. And I think this really gets down to your question. With blended learning, it's just about, you know, learning about the gas laws and applying the gas laws and then going on to your next topic. But have you really learned it? With flipped learning, since you've offloaded your lecture, you now have that entire classroom period to do all of these really fun things. And in teacher school, I learned about all of these things. But I'm like, but how do I do all those fun things when I have to give the lecture, when I have to give the quiz, when I have to take attendance, you know, all those things that get in the way. So even if you're just going to stick with a flipped classroom, and there's nothing wrong with that. A lot of teachers will only stay sort of in that severe. And I'll show you some research in a moment. But even if you're just offloading your lecture, and that's all you're going to do, you're still going to have time, extended time to do those labs. I mean, when you were in science class in 11th grade, you'd listen to the lecture, you'd have to set up your lab, you maybe get 2 minutes to do the lab experiment and hope it worked. And if it didn't, you wouldn't have time to redo it again. But now if you have the entire 50 minutes of the class period to set up your lab, try the experiment, oh, it failed, let me tweak it to see how I get it right. I mean, that's something that at least I never experienced in those classes that I've, you know, sat in on. So just think of it, extended lab time, demonstrations, presentations, actually have a real debate in class. Performances, mock elections, the mock Supreme Court, art shows, you know, all these great entrepreneurial efforts that we keep hearing about where like kids create these little towns and create money. I mean, you can do that now because you're not lecturing at them the whole time. And writers' workshops, oh, I would be such a much better teacher. Just quickly what a writer's workshop, what my superstar teacher in Colorado does. And she doesn't front load videos. Most time, you know, your math and science teachers tend to front load the videos. They have to watch the video before students come to class. Well, what I'm seeing English teachers do is, you know, when Kate hands in her paper, of course she emails it into the teacher, the teacher opens up the paper right there on the page, hits play, and says, hey Kate, this is a great paper, but your lead sentence is missing this, your transition needs a little work here. Oh, this is a great example, but your citation, you know, review APA citation, remember there are 3 forms of it's and it's, whatever, and closes it, emails it back to Kate, she revises it, and they can do this 4 or 5 times because it's like a 5-minute mini workshop that they've just had, where a teacher can't do that for 80 students in the class. But with 2-3 minute, writer workshops right there recorded and sent back, you can. So I just think that alone. And that, of course, happens, in the midst of class. If you're moving into a flipped learning method, this is where you can really go into mastery learning. And again, I can talk to you offline about this if you want. But this is mastery learning with a capital M, which is a formal methodology. John and Erin teach mastery chemistry. As an English teacher, I would not do it. It works better for math and chemistry teachers. But if you all understand chapters 1, 2, and 3, and Kate, I keep picking on you, I'm sorry, we're not getting it, why should you guys just sit there and shoot footballs at each other and disrupt class when you can just go on, because you've proven, your assessments show that you're ready to go on. And so in a mastery class, capital M mastery class, students are at different places within the course. And so this, teacher is always bringing up sort of, the end of the class, if you will, but running back and forth to making sure that you guys are on task and working ahead since you are able to do that. So we see a lot of math and science classes in mastery mode. If I was a social studies teacher, I would totally teach in a project. Sometimes it's project, sometimes it's problem, sometimes it's inquiry. They're kind of synonymous with each other, but I would teach in that manner. What is an issue within the community that the students identify that is a problem that they can solve? And then they go and do it. Like I said, a social studies, humanities teacher, I would be all over that. As an English teacher, I'd be totally into peer instruction, which is a form of Socratic method. The latest one is the Socratic silent method. Google it, it's pretty cute. But that's how I would teach. Again, I think, who was I just talking to about, I think it was you, Ms. Adobe, about that lecture. You don't need to be a subject matter expert if you're teaching. Actually, in a true Socratic method, the moderator is supposed to know nothing about the topic. I don't think we can go that far. But I would lead that in peer instruction. Another way, especially if I was in like a social studies, modern current events class, I would do service learning or community service overlaid on this. So again, I hope this answers a little bit more of your question about how you can dive deeper and use your classroom time in this personalized setting. Don't forget, especially for those of you in the classroom, professional development, which I think many of you, HR, your faculty and department meetings, and your parent and community relations can also be flipped. Okay, quickly, I'm just going to go through the research. So last June, again, you don't need to take notes on this, it's free online. Pearson and the Flipped Learning Network did a meta-analysis on the research that exists out there. And I have the executive summary, which also has the flip on the back. This is the white paper version, but there is then the full literature review. And so if you know anyone who's working on their thesis or dissertation, just let them know that the bibliography is already done for them. So what does the data say? I alluded to this a little bit earlier, so I'll just go through it. Who is a typical flipped educator? While there is no stereotype, we know that they tend to be more innovative, creative. They tolerate chaos better. 85% of them, and this was from a year ago, but we've done 2 surveys in the meantime that have come to the same conclusions of this. The vast majority have over 7 years of teaching experience. 91% of them have been flipping for less than 2 years. The majority of them are secondary education teachers. We're doing the same survey right now, and I think that number will be more balanced between secondary and elementary. And 99% of them would use it again. This is really huge, and again, we're going back to the fact that this is, these are your parents, your students' teachers, and who do you want teaching your child? But those teachers who have at least 7 years of experience. And so, using the flipped learning method, 88% of that vast majority of teachers said that they had improved job satisfaction, with 46% of that 88% saying they had significantly improved job satisfaction. This is a time when teachers are just saying, okay, I'm burned out, I can't handle it anymore, and they're saying, this is it, this changed my teaching style, and I'm hearing this over and over again. So just that jazzes me, that you're getting people who are really re-engaging because they're doing what they wanted to do, work individually and in small groups with those students. These same teachers also reported student attitudes improving, and they also said, in particular, the test scores were improving for your AP and your special needs students, the two groups at the end of the spectrum, in particular where nowadays you have to be reporting on all groups. And so 67% are saying they're seeing improvements in just these groups. I think someone brought this up, or maybe it was Josh brought this up. And sorry, they look better when it's just a tiny slide. I'll have to find better ones. But everyone knows this. Dr. Everett was out of the University of Iowa, right? And he was, this originally goes back to agriculture, but it applies to all categories. But it's the diffusion of innovations. And so right now, the innovators are people like John and Aaron. And they're the ones, my cadre members who have been doing this for 7 years already. So right now, we're still in the early adopter phase. And we're just hitting the tip of the iceberg of who knows about flipped learning and has, practiced it a little bit. Maybe they flipped a lesson, maybe they flipped a unit, maybe they're thinking about flipping a course for next spring, but we're still in that early adopter phase. I think in the next 3 years, we'll get to the early majority. I figure once the schools of education bring this into their curriculum, they're always the last one, will be with the late majority. And frankly, the laggards will be retired by then, so we'll be fine. Here's a quick case study. Now, Troy uses terms just a little bit differently, so I'm going to give you the definition, but then I'll walk through you with this. So Troy Faulkner teaches at a small school west of Rochester, Minnesota. And the reason that that's important is that half of his student body are the children of doctors at Mayo Clinic, and half of his students are the children of farmers, particularly hog farmers, because Hormel plant is headquartered there. And so he has this great dynamic, not that the hog farmers are poor by any means, but just really, two sets of students in the school. So for 3 years, this was now 4 years ago, but the blue line reflects just the plain old lecture, what you and I did when we were in math class. Now he calls the traditional flip what we call flip class, where he took the class, just recorded it, and then just did the same thing in the classroom. So this was flip classroom. Peer flip, when he fully integrated it, he read Dr. Eric Mazur's book, who is all about peer instruction. And so that was his in-class methodology that he adapted. So this would be the flipped learning. And this was for pre-calc. Same test every year. They use the same textbook. It was a Pearson textbook. And so the same test. But you can just see how chapters 1 through 5, that final, chapters 6, 7, 8, 9, he didn't, 9 and 11, and final. But really significant increases in pre-calc. He also did this in just calculus. The other one was pre-calc. This is calc. Same thing. This was an 8-chapter book. This is just geometry failure rate of going from a lecture to a flipped class. He went from 13% down to 6%. Troy also teaches, happens to be my alma mater, and he teaches intro to stats. So this is for my higher ed friends in the room, of the class average. And there's much more of this. This is just, again, here's where you can download it. So why is flipped learning working? What's the convergent right now? What's the tipping point? Is it because we're moving from, No Child Left Behind into Common Core state standards? Is it because teachers have all of this equipment that they can finally be using? Are teachers fed up and want to do something new, and they've heard about this movement? Because right now it's pretty much still a grassroots movement. So what is it that is causing, you can't open a publication these days without seeing something about flipped learning. I'd like to take all the credit for it, but it's just crazy. I get Google those things, you know, what's it called? Yeah, thank you. And another one just in Forbes today, one in Malta. I mean, I can't keep track of all of it. But I think this right now, and this is from Edgar Dale, and we've all seen this before, but let's overlay this now with our new Flip Learning hat on. So we know that people, learners, you know, you remember about 10% of what you read, about 20% of what you hear, 30% of what you see, including images and videos, 50% of what you see and hear, if you're watching a demonstration, 70% of what you say and write, so if you are giving a hands-on workshop in your small groups, you know, if you're designing collaborative lessons, but look at this, 90%, you retain 90% of what you stimulate, model, experience, giving a presentation, of taking all of these higher order learning skills, and if you do it, you'll retain 90%. And I just think right there, how we deliver training, be it for an adult learner, a college level learner, or an elementary or secondary learner. We cannot just do that direct instruction anymore without adding something to it. And you can pick whichever, if you want the higher order learning thinking, if you want Bloom's taxonomy, taking this, get a list of verbs. Seriously, I keep a list of verbs. And I just make sure when I'm writing everything that you go through. You still need to make sure that you are remembering, but then how are you analyzing it? How are you assessing it? There's great lists out there. So I'm going to close up, but I just do want to tell you just a little bit about the Flip Learning Network. As I mentioned, I am the executive director. We're a nonprofit organization. If you need any more information, we got it for you. We love webinars. We highly value them. We have an entire library of archived webinars, and we have, I think, 10 on the books that are still live for this year. So just look there. We have workshops, we have institutes, workshops. We were just in Rhode Island last week. Next week we're in Pennsylvania and Illinois and Florida. I'm in Orlando next week, Texas the week after that. Ning, Josh talked about finding your community of practice. And this, everyone in the room should be able to find their community of practice. Our Ning is free. When I started the organization 2 years ago, we had 2,500 people on the Ning. We'll probably hit 16,000 by next week. Within the Ning, there are over 50 groups. And so if you are a high school math teacher who also works with special ed kids, and you happen to be a local firefighter, you will find a group for each one of those. Like the firefighters are all over this because they have to flip all their PD because they can't go to do PD because what happens if a call comes in? So I've got a fire chief in Madison, Wisconsin. He's the best spokesperson I have. He's awesome. So you will find your communities of practice. If not, start one. Flip Day we just had. It was on 9/6 because the number is flip. You got to be cute like that. And we had 400 teachers in 25 countries who pledged to flip a lesson. And this was the audience for that one specifically was new teachers, because it can be very intimidating. So if we just said, just pledge to flip one lesson, and then we gave them a whole series of lessons that they could choose from. It also happened to be that both Adobe and TechSmith donated site license for those teachers if they wanted to come in and download the lecture capture system for 30 days, that teachers could do that so they could create their own lessons as well. So we appreciate that. The next one we have coming up is a Flip Class Open House. This is actually for experienced Flip teachers who are confident enough in their teaching that they literally open up the doors of their classroom. This is not virtual, this is real. And so they'll say, hey, the Chicago High School for the Performing Arts, between 10 and 11 and 1 and 4, I have flip classes going on, RSVP here if you want to come. And it's open to other teachers, administrator, community members, and press. We do ask that they RSVP. They, of course, have to go through the front office and so forth. But on average, we get about 40 open houses, and again, about 5 or 6 countries. for that one, and huge success. So we're looking forward to that. It's also on Digital Learning Day, which is, Kate, help me, February 6th? I think it's February 6th. We have research, we have case studies that Byron, the charts that I showed you from Byron are a case study. Clintondale High School has its own case study. We have books, we have videos, we have podcasts. Just quickly, we do have an annual conference. This year it's in Pittsburgh. All of our annual conferences are held in high-tech high schools. It's really important for my board to have this time of sharing. We don't come to hotels like this, and so we're literally sitting in desks that hopefully we can arrange. But this year it's in June. We're in Pittsburgh and Mars area high school, and we do hold it face-to-face in a traditional conference style, if you will, but we also hold it virtually. And so we're actually talking to Adobe this year to see if they can help us with that. We're very excited. And we have equal number of people attend virtually as we do face-to-face. And for virtually, they get all of the keynote speakers streamed live. They get half of all the concurrent sessions streamed live, but then everything is archived so you can go back and pick which channel. So if there's one session strand that you want to watch, everything is there and it's up for 6 months. So you could literally see most of the conference by just attending virtually. And of course then all the on-site attendees get it as well so that they can go back and see things. So we have huge success in our virtual conference. We're really pleased with it. So there's my email address. I'm very accessible. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I look forward to seeing you in the future.